I look at who I am and how my life has unraveled up until this point, and all I can feel is an overwhelming sense of appreciation and gratitude. I have been raised by an incredible family who has sacrificed everything to make a better life for me and my siblings. I was raised in a community that educated me on my heritage and on the importance of knowing where I come from. I have grown up in places and by people who have supported me and that have shaped my identity in foundational ways. I have been so fortunate, it's almost unreal. Though I have been blessed by all the good things in my life, I've also had the burden of a complex identity, one that is multidimensional and that struggles to classify itself in a specific place or being. After a semester in cultural diversity, I now not only have the vocabulary to express and define these complexities, but I am now in the process of understanding these complexities beyond my own self. Through intense reflections that have developed and explored my cultural awareness, and through immersions that have challenged my cultural knowledge, I feel I have a new perspective. I now have skills that allow me to be a more global citizen to the world. This semester in cultural diversity was just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to my journey of cultural awareness and competency. I've learned so much about myself and others through critical analysis and reflection. I'm a first-generation American that descends from a long line of Persian Jews. My family moved to the United States in 1985 after the fall of the Shah in Iran. When the Islamic Republic came into place, my family lived in the parameters of a dictatorship that denied them their religious freedom and human rights. It took 10 years to get a passport to come to America, but after years of patience, my parents left their entire lives behind them for a chance to live a life and raise a family with the same freedoms they had growing up. Because my parents are not American, English was not my first language. My siblings and I grew up speaking the language of our ancestors, Farsi. My parents knew that eventually I would be speaking English, and in attempts to keep me in some line of my heritage, they sent me to Jewish private school where for 10 years I grew up learning Hebrew, the language of my religious background, and English, the language of the society that I lived in. In many ways, I was comfortable being in a community where I was with people whose religious identity aligned with mine, but I was not an American Jew. The vast differences between culture in American and Persian Judaism were surprisingly alienating when I was growing up. I had dark, thick hair, dark eyes, and I didn't speak English. The school also did not provide the proper resources to aid me in my language difference, so I was held back in kindergarten, a decision that would shape my identity and academic career for the rest of my life. Throughout the years, as my family became more accustomed to American life, aspects of their culture clashed with the American culture. It was difficult to understand so many of my own thoughts and opinions while being simultaneously raised in two cultures. In many ways, Americanization rocked my family to the core. Though in many ways my family was able to live a free life in Iran, when they came to America, they were exposed to the internal oppressions that their culture burdened them with. Most of the women in my family were married off in their teens, having babies between the ages of 16 and 19 years old. Their lives became their families and their children. Both my grandmother and mother pursued careers when they immigrated, which caused conflict within the family. My mother was able to gain a stronger sense of character and self-worth after working her way up in a company. And once she was financially stable, she divorced my father when I was 10 years old and saved me and my family. This act not only disturbed a lot of my family, but also the Persian community around me, which prided itself on strong family ties. It was at this time, with the inspiration and strength of my mother, that I started to explore myself beyond the realm of my Persian Jewish heritage. I explored the experience of living in the South. I wanted to try more American food and American activities. I decided to go to summer camp in Cleveland, Georgia, in the Appalachian Mountains. It was here where I discovered American culture through things like music and nature. I fell in love with the camp's horseback riding program, a program that I now have the privilege of expanding and managing. I fell in love with the Blue Ridge Mountains, sweet tea, and Johnny Cash, all of which were far from my roots. The more I fell in love with my new developing identity, the more conflicted I became about my identity with my family and Persian ancestry. I resented the lack of exposure and lifestyles my upbringing denied me. I resented the oppression of women and the suppression of emotion for the sake of maintaining a good image within the community. And yet, I still found some comfort in my family and sense of belonging in my community. I decided to leave the Jewish community in high school when I was offered a scholarship at a private school that could help me academically and socially in ways that my Jewish private school could not. At the high school, I was exposed to different cultures, people of different races, a different academic philosophy, people of different ethnicities, and I was overwhelmed with curiosity and questions. I was able to see others in a way I never had before, and because of how much I enjoyed myself in high school, I decided to come to Georgia State in the hopes of immersing myself into a larger pool of diversity. Throughout my college experience, I've been able to both internally and externally examine my intersectionality. I can now see how being raised in a strong classified community has helped me formulate my identity and sense of self. And with that, I can push myself in different ways by exposing myself to different cultures and people. There were points in my life where I thought I would have to choose one culture over another. I now understand that it is the combination of my Jewish Persian culture and my American culture that make me a stronger individual. I am dominant in society because I am able-bodied, because I do not identify as LGBTQ, and because I was raised in a middle-class community. I grew up as an active child. I could play outside, ride my horses, dance, get up and down the stairs myself, and for the most part of my life, I never considered that this was all privilege because I was able-bodied. I do not identify as LGBT, and therefore I fall into a mainstream sexual orientation that does not get discriminated against. I was not bullied or abused for my sexual orientation and can freely express my sexual orientation without ridicule or fear. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood where I was not exposed to violence or poverty. I have not earned any of these advantages that have categorized me in dominant groups. They have simply been handed to me because of chance and circumstance. I am subordinate in society because I am Jewish, because I'm a first-generation American, and because I am a woman. I live in a society that was founded on Christian ideology, and the effects of this have left me somewhat alienated. There are times I feel I cannot be honest about myself for fear of religious discrimination. Being a first-generation American, I grew up not speaking the native language, which set me back in school and with certain peers. I looked different than many of my peers outside of my family, and internally felt ashamed or as if there was something wrong with me because I was darker. I'm constantly asked by strangers if I'm African American, Mexican, Indian, or Muslim. I explored my subordination of being a woman extensively in my group project. We live in a patriarchal society that controls women both externally and internally in ways that affect women in more ways than even thought possible. I've experienced this within my community where women are subordinate in Persian culture. I've also experienced this in managing a bar and program that has never had a female executive. In order to challenge and expand my knowledge on other people and other cultures, I attended Gay Pride in Atlanta, spent time in a classroom with students with disabilities, interviewed a Vietnamese American, and even explored the viewpoints of the men in Persian culture in an attempt in understanding their roles in a male-dominant culture. These cultural immersions were challenging and surprisingly emotional. I found myself resonating with these different cultures at certain times. A part of me can identify with these groups, but at other times I could feel myself learning and expanding my knowledge with new information I hadn't had before. After a semester spent looking into my own identity and into the identity of others, I feel I have gained skills that I can continue to develop in my social work career. My understanding of cultures and the subcultures of those cultures have grown immensely, and I look forward to continuing on this journey of cultural awareness and competency. When I took the pre-test at the beginning of the semester, I received a score of 77 on the cultural awareness test and a 177 on the cultural competency test. By the end of the semester, I received a 140 on the awareness and a 250 on the cultural competency post-tests. I have realized that in order to help others with who they are, you must first look to yourself and discover who you are. I think it is important to understand that these two processes of exploration are almost never ending because people are always living and being, and they are changing and are dynamic. I look forward to the rest of my academic, personal, and professional career with a new sense of self and a new perspective on others.